Good afternoon. August 2018 monthly webinar disclaimers. We are not attorneys. We are not offering legal advice. When you have legal questions, hire an attorney. This is the PI Education monthly webinar for August 2018. I'm Hal Humphreys, your host. Today, the business of investigating. PI Education offers these monthly webinars every month on the fourth Thursday of the month. They're free, they're informative, they're a way for you to get to know us and us to get to know you. We're glad you're here. A little bit about the structure of this webinar. We'll take a break at about the halfway point to shamelessly plug some of our educational offerings. If you need to leave to take a call or for any other reason, don't worry about missing anything. We keep the recorded webinar up here on our YouTube channel for you to come back to again and again. Speaking of YouTube, if you don't mind, take a second. Right underneath your video screen there, you'll see a subscribe button. Click on that. It doesn't cost you anything. It helps us out a great deal to have more subscribers on the YouTube channel. So that's it for the introduction for the August 2018 monthly webinar for PI Education. I'm joined today by Brian Willingham of Diligentia Group in New York. Brian has been a part of these webinars a couple of times. He is one of our instructors at PI Education. We always love when Brian joins in. Brian, if you don't mind, take a couple of minutes and just tell people who you are, what you do, where you're from.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me on again. I've become like a regular on the program here. I'm like a CNN or Fox News expert. So my name is Brian Willingham. I'm a private investigator. I'm based in New York. I've been a private investigator for 17 years now. I worked for a firm based in White Plains for about 8 or 9 years and went off on my own about 9 years ago. So over the last 9 years, I've started from scratch, started my own investigative firm, and then built up my practice since then. And over that time, I've done quite a bit of marketing and business development, and developed a nice little niche, successful practice here. And Hal and I, we discuss these kind of business development and small business sort of issues all the time. And I thought it'd be a good opportunity to talk about it.
Yeah, and I think I didn't realize you're 9 years into this. My 10-year anniversary of owning my own PI firm is coming up in October. We're both basically in the same boat. We started our businesses kind of late in the game, I guess. I was 40 years old when I started my PI firm. So we both had general business experience. You had some PI experience. I had due diligence experience. But we both kind of came out of the ground with nothing, and have built what I think are two pretty successful boutique private investigations businesses. And I want to talk today. We haven't really decided on a really hard structure for the day's webinar, but I think there are several things we can do. One of which is just talk a little bit about how you got started. How did you set up your office when you first started doing this?
Yeah. So I think before we even get into all that stuff, I mean, I think one of the critical things here that I think everybody should take away is that I'll speak for myself, I'll speak for Hal too, but this is based on our personal experiences. My personal experience may be very different from the next guy. And these are the kind of things that have worked for me. I think those are, from a practicality point of view, I'm only going to talk about things that I know and have done, and I'll give you specifics about what things that I've done. So what may work for me may not work for everybody else. The other thing is, I'm not running this massive multi-million-dollar investigative firm. I've since the beginning, since I started this, I had very clear goals in mind as to what I envisioned my business and what I wanted to look like. I was in a position where I was working for a bigger firm. People were reporting to me, and I was pushing a lot of paper at that point, to be perfectly frank, reviewing people's reports, kind of managing people, and wasn't sort of getting my hands dirty doing the work. And I think that's, one of the things that happens once you become sort of a bigger firm. And at that point in my life, I decided that I wanted to be more sort of hands-on, involved with the work. So anyway, that's kind of just sort of a general introduction. And the last thing is, I think Hal and I will agree to this, is that there's no right or wrong answers with any of this stuff. I mean, what we tell you you might think we're absolutely crazy, and in some cases we probably are.
Oh, I think we can agree that we are absolutely crazy. And
So
there before you get started, there are so many ways to skin a cat when you're talking about the PI business. There's so many models for working this business. This is it just so happens Brian and I have kind of a similar model, and I think our approach is applicable to a lot of people out there in the PI business that have kind of a 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 man shop that are just trying to do, very specific, high quality work, that kind of business. So anyway, go ahead, Brian.
And I think we probably run into sort of the same sort of issues too. We have Hal works on a lot of criminal defense cases, and I don't. I've worked on a couple of big white collar criminal defense cases, but those are not the cases that I get involved with. But we still had similar sort of thoughts and ideas and issues. So anyway, as far as getting started, I started with 10 grand. I built an office in my house, in the basement. I hired a guy to put some walls around in my basement office, bought a computer, and within a week I was set up. And I knew exactly what my only goal at the beginning was to try to get enough work that I can just sort of survive the first month. And that was, I had 0 clients, 0 idea of what I was going to do to generate money. But I had a confidence in myself. I knew that just being out there, I knew that I was good at what I did. And the first thing that I did was I called every single investigator that I had worked with. And that's going to be a common theme here, is your network. And I think, Hal and I will talk about that more, but, I had developed a network over the 9 years that I was doing this. People that I had worked with, people that I had come into contact with. The investigative business is very incestual, in the sense that, we would get work from other investigative firms. We would give other investigative firm work that was overflow work and those kind of things. So I had these relationships with all these people, and, your network is, people tend to think of building a network and networking and all this stuff as something they need to do when they need a job or they need something out of somebody. But the reality is you have to have a good base of a network when you have to start going and ask those questions. So I called every single person that I'd ever done work with, and within a few days, I had myself a case. It was an investigative firm in New York City who had an overflow of work, which happens quite often in the investigative business. It comes and goes, and they had a trial coming up, and they needed an extra body. And for the next 3 weeks, I spent on this case, including my entire Labor Day weekend, which is kind of a coincidence. My introduction into being a small business owner was that I was working probably twice as hard as I was before, and working through Labor Day weekend. And from that point, the rest is sort of history. And most of my work in that first sort of 6 months came from that one client. And as time went on, things sort of changed by networking, doing great work, and sort of built my sort of practice, and the rest has sort of been history.
Right. You said you started with $10,000. We've got a question from the audience. Of that initial $10,000 investment, how much was used for licensure or insurance? How much did you have to spend on those things?
I think the license in New York State's $550. I think I bought a $2,000 computer, I want to say. I got 2 or 3 monitors, 2 monitors I got, and the highest end Dell computer. I bought a laptop as well. And insurance, I think at that time, as a solo practicer, it was $700 or $800.
Yeah.
And that included my incorporation fees, which was $500 as well. So I mean, I bought. I think that's one of the things that I think everybody should get through their head too, is that you don't need business cards, you don't need materials, you don't need anything to get started. You need a computer, you need a license, you might need an access to a database here or there. But that's one thing I wouldn't get hung up in, and certainly I didn't get hung up in, is making sure I had everything in order just in case somebody called. that needed something. I had a network in place that if I needed some help on something, or needed a database, or I needed access to something, I could get some help from that. But I was profitable by September. I started August 20th. And in September, I was already profitable.
Yeah. And I think the point I want to kind of harp on here is the networking thing. A lot of people think about networking as, like you said, I'm trying to find a job, I'm going to go to networking events, those kind of things. I know for a fact that when Brian travels, he just took a trip to California a couple of months ago, and he was calling me saying, "Hey, do you know any investigators in California that I could meet up with, have a cocktail with, that kind of thing?" We both do that when we travel around the country. If I'm in Texas, which I am a lot, I try to find other investigators that are doing good work that I'd like to know and meet with them, maybe buy them a drink or buy dinner or lunch or whatever is convenient for them. But when I travel to Florida, I'll try to meet up with someone. Chicago, the same thing. So the networking thing is basically, it's all day long. You want to be networking at all times, building your Rolodex of fellow investigators that can help you out of a pinch, cover for you if you're asked to do something in another state or another city. Do a little bit of research for you, and then be willing to help them out. The networking is key. The other thing that Brian said that I think is really important, I spent a lot of money up front on business cards. Now, I had some really nice business cards designed, and letterhead and the whole schlemiel. I spent a lot of money on the website as well. I have since abandoned those business cards, that website design, and I'm using now, I think, a strikingly website. I rarely carry business cards with me. It just doesn't come into play that much. And Brian and I were talking earlier about, kind of how do we get business? Most of my business at this point is word of mouth. I, work with an attorney. He introduces me to another attorney who says, "Oh my gosh, we'd love to have you on this case," that kind of business. So don't worry too much about what I would call cosmetic things, as much as worrying about getting a network of fellow investigators and attorneys that you can reach out to.
And one real quick point to add on to what Hal was talking about is when, especially when you're first starting, I had zero overhead when I first started. I had, my licensing fees and whatever else I needed to pay, but zero overhead. I didn't have subscriptions to anything. I had nothing. And over time, over 9 years, that is built. I have an answering service. I have an office. I have other bills that I pay on a regular sort of basis. But for me, I wanted to keep my overhead as low as possible. And that included not having an office. And I didn't have an office for 7-8 years until within the last year and a half that I've really had an office. And 9 years ago, that was kind of probably not more the norm. I think it's probably a little bit more the norm of people working out of their office. But the reality is that, I've been 17 years I've been doing business. I've met clients in my office a handful of times. It's just my type of work. And listen, everybody's going to have different kinds of work, and you may want to have that so you can look professional and all that. But there's different ways to look professional, and having an office and having all this overhead, especially when you first start, is not necessary. I don't need a secretary to answer the phones. I'm answering the phone myself, So I think, especially starting out, having as minimal amount of overhead as you possibly can is absolutely crucial.
And the other thing I want to talk about a little bit is, when Brian started his business, he started off with a $10,000 little nest egg to kind of cover some upfront costs. I was in a position where I was working for a company at the time I started my business, and the man that I was working for at the time was kind enough, and I was going into a completely different branch of investigations than what he did. And he allowed me the flexibility to kind of build my client base and do that thing over. It ended up being almost a full year's worth of time that I was able to kind of go out and do other work and still take care of some projects for him, but it allowed me to build up that thing. So I say that if you're a police officer and you want to get into private investigations, that might be a thing you could do. Go ahead and get your license, get that thing taken care of, and then start working cases on the side. I've got a friend up in New York, Ron Rispoli. I think Brian knows Ron. Ron did that when he was working with the police department. He started doing some cases on the side as a private investigator, and he built up a really good client base. And then he was able to seamlessly walk out of his job with the police department and become a private investigator full fledged. But the important thing is, if you're starting out, you want to keep your overhead as low as possible. And there are a lot of things you can do without having an office space and renting office space and the big, huge desk and the client chairs. It's just by and large not necessary. So, Brian, you think we've kind of beat the dead horse of starting up enough?
Yeah, I absolutely. I think sort of the next part of it is sort of how to get clients and how do you do that. And I think you're going to hear this over and over again from Hal and I, but it's word of mouth, it's networking, and the key there is that you've got to be really fucking good at what you do. You have to be able to perform, and performing doesn't necessarily mean, winning every case or coming up with that, 1 in a million shot needle in a haystack. It's about showing up. It's about being helpful. It's about, putting in the extra effort, putting in the hard work. There's so many times I've been referred by so many people that I haven't necessarily, I've given my A game, my effort and everything that I can, but I didn't necessarily give them exactly what they were looking for. For example, I worked on a white collar criminal defense case a couple of years ago that lasted a couple of years. The gentleman was ultimately convicted and is currently serving jail time. That attorney has referred me to so many cases, and it wasn't, I didn't find that $1 million piece of information, but he saw the work and the effort that I put in. He knows I'm a known quantity. So, I think one of the mistakes that people make is that they think that there's a pressure to always get the goods, and getting the goods may not necessarily be getting that, 1 in a million piece of information. It may be that you've put in the work and the effort, and you've explained to them, this is what I did, this is how I got here, these are all the things I did, and providing that to them in some sort of coherent formula that they can understand. I don't know if you've had the same experience, Hal, but it's not necessarily about that 1 in a million shot.
No, and quite honestly, I think you'll find if you're new to this, but if you've been in this business for quite some time, you understand what I'm about to say. If you're new to the business, here's the thing. A lot of times that 1 in a million, that one thing that you're hoping to get just doesn't exist, and you can't make it up. You can't go just make up stuff to make a case. If it's not there, it's not there. The thing that I find that my attorneys that I work with appreciate the most is, and I kind of jokingly tell them, I'm not the best investigator out there. There's just no doubt about it. I'm not the best, but I'm competent, and I show up and I answer the phone. And if you do those things and you show up and you're there to do the work and you're competent and you answer the phone and you're responsive, then you're going to be more successful. And the attorneys that you work with will refer you to other attorneys. And that's really the best way I can think of to get clients. Now, I know for a fact that, Kelly Riddle is a great model for kind of the bigger agency model, and Kelly does a lot of good work. And for the folks out there in Texas, Kelly, he has a large firm. He's got a lot of people working for him, and he markets to insurance companies and larger corporations. And he spends a lot of money on marketing, and he spends a lot of money on office space and those things. But that model works for him. The model that Brian and I both come from is more of a boutique model where, here's the thing. I think a lot of people get into the PI business because they don't want to have a boss. I have a notion Brian's the same way as me in this. I mean, I like the flexibility to, work 2 full weeks straight on a project and then come home and do nothing for a couple of days. I like that flexibility. I don't like having to be in an office at specific hours from 8 to 5 Monday through Friday. That doesn't intrigue me at all. I'd rather be out working 16-hour days for a couple of weeks in a row, and then take some time off and go do what I want to do. Brian, we have a question from the crowd. Someone says, it's Tremel Pittman asks, do you have a cost list of different things that you offer? If so, should I go about structuring mine in a similar way? So do you have a cost list, and how do you suggest people think about that?
Sure. I don't. In general, here's what I would say. I didn't develop a cost list sort of right when I first started. And developing an hourly rate or coming up with an hourly rate that you want to charge, I think is something that I think that it's obviously a perfect time to start discussing that. But most investigators charge by the hour. And for there are certain types of cases that I started getting frequently. I do really in-depth background investigations, comprehensive investigations on for private equity firms or investors and things along those lines. So that became sort of a standard product for me. And over time, I realized that I needed to develop some sort of pricing structure so that I didn't have to answer these questions over and over again. And I can send people materials and they can look at it. They can say exactly what's in there and those kind of things. Most cases that investigators take, and it really depends on the types of cases that you work on, are sort of bespoke. You are going to charge by the hour. You need to come up with some sort of budget that you think would be reasonable, that they would pay, and that will get you to the answers that you want to get to, or that you need to get to. But I didn't come up with a price list. And the hourly rate thing, I think, is something that you have to sort of come up with at the beginning. Figure out what your hourly charge is going to be. And this is where Hal and I might differ, or other people might think I'm crazy here. But I think you should be charging whatever the hell you are comfortable charging, within reason. And the reason I say that is I think people get hung up in what this person charges versus what that person charges. It doesn't really matter, honestly. What matters is that you're bringing results and you're bringing bringing the goods to your client, and that's all that matters. And what it's worth to you. If I tell you that I'll only take this case if I can get $2,500, because that's what I feel like. Number one, I'm going to need to get some answers from my client. I'm not taking a case. They can only afford $500. It doesn't matter to me, because what matters to me is being able to get the answers that my client is looking for and being helpful to them. What they can afford, it's not really, and it sounds horrible, but it doesn't matter as much to me. Does that make sense to you, Hal, or is that something that you differ in there?
No, it makes total sense to me. There are a couple of things to think about. So location has a lot to do with what you can and cannot charge. I live in Nashville, Tennessee. The cost of living is significantly less than the cost of living in New York. So I'm fairly certain Brian charges a higher hourly rate than I charge. That said, I've developed a couple of things that I do with my clients around the country. If I'm going to be working on a case for a long period of time, say a week or 14 days straight on one case, and that happens a lot in the criminal defense world. I'll get hired by an attorney to work on one specific case for 2 weeks straight. At that point, I'm very happy to quote the attorney a day rate that is based on an hourly rate for an 8-hour day, but I will give them 10, 15, 16 hours a day at the day rate, because I can't sit there and bill hours at home to equate to that. So the day rate is something they can get their head around. It's kind of an easier fixed cost than an hourly rate. But either way, just think about what it is that you need to do to pay your bills, to live the lifestyle you want to live, those kind of things. And then, like Brian said, I find that in the Nashville market, I think I charge close to the top of the range on an hourly basis here in Nashville. There are probably a couple of investigators that charge more than I do. Most of them don't charge as much, but I really don't care, because I've got a number that works for me. So that ends up being kind of a personal thing. If you're starting out, it would not hurt to kind of poll other PIs and see what they bill on an hourly rate basis, and test that against the market. See if you can meet it or best it. I've had a couple of investigators that I've worked with over the past couple of years who have said, "Do you think I can charge?" If they're going from $75 to $100 an hour, they're really scared or trepid about doing that because they think they're going to lose clients. The funny thing is, attorneys are used to paying an hourly rate, and attorneys don't ever hesitate to say, it's $300 an hour, whatever. You just say to the attorney, "This is my rate per hour. I think it's going to take X number of hours," or, "What is your budget?" And you work within that. I don't think anybody finds it offensive for you to bill for your time and your expertise.
Yeah, and just to your point, we could probably have a whole hour-long topic about that. I've raised my rates 7 or 8 times over the last 9 years. Probably not that much, 4 or 5 probably. You're always concerned. You always think that I'm going to start losing work because they don't want to pay as much. But the reality is, I've never lost a single client over a couple of dollars an hour that I'm charging, ever. Nobody has ever come back to me. Of course, I've gotten pushback. Of course, somebody has said this or that. And the reality is, I don't typically. I'm very convinced, and I have a deep conviction of, like, this is what I'm worth. This is what I'm charging. And if you don't want to pay for it, that's totally fine. There's somebody else that will take the work. And, you obviously, when you're starting out and you've been 9, 10 years into the business, you have very different sort of mentality. I would take anything and everything at the beginning, provided it was in my wheelhouse. I'm not taking anything that's not in my wheelhouse. And now I'm certainly a little bit more suspect of it. So if somebody's trying to beat me up over a couple dollars an hour, I have a pretty good sense that this may not be a great client anyway. If they're beating me up over a couple dollars an hour at the first engagement letter or a couple words on engagement letter, this engagement may not last too long. So anyway, it's something that, I think investigators in general have an issue with. And if you're in a very competitive marketplace, and you're doing surveillance, for example, and there's 28 other firms in your zip code that do the same thing, of course, people are going to be much more sensitive to that. But the type of work that I do, and I think Hal does, and hopefully the type of work that you get involved in is not as price sensitive. You want to be able to be that guy who offers a specialty or an expertise in something that not everybody has, and that you're able to charge, a little bit extra premium, or if you are in a space that is very competitive, such as doing insurance surveillance and those kind of things, that you provide exceptional quality and exceptional service, that you can charge a little bit of higher rate than everybody else.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that I'll say, and I get pushback from other investigators on this on a fairly regular basis, I just don't sweat the money that much. If I'm working with an attorney that I have a long-term relationship with, and they say, "I've got X number of dollars to spend on this, we need this, this, and this done," I'll help them out. I'll do the work, because I know that over the long term, if I'm going to badger them for a couple of $100 on one job and leave a foul taste in their mouth, I'm not going to get the work later on. So, I think Brian gets that. It's a dance. You've got to figure out what works. You have to pay your bills. You have to pay yourself. And you're a human being working for a living. You have a right to make a living and enjoy your free time. So think about those things. Moving on, we got a question from the audience, and I love this question. Should I spend a lot of money on a website? I'll tell you 2 things. I spent a lot of money on my first website. The second website I developed, which is findinvestigations.com. It is a strikingly web page. I think I kicked it up to the pro package a couple of months ago or a couple of years ago, and it's a decent looking web page. It doesn't have a whole lot of interactivity. It's basically a one-page scroll web page. The website for me ends up being just validation for people that are being referred to me. They can go to the website and see that I'm a real human being. It does not bring in business for me. Now, I know Brian's website, he uses the blog to market himself and do those things. So, Brian, what do you think about the website business?
I think the short answer is absolutely not. It does not pay to have a very expensive website. I will tell you that my website has been the most important thing that I've done marketing-wise in all of my business. And so let me explain that. So the first website that I had was a WordPress website, and it still is a WordPress website. The most critical thing about a website is, one, it's just showing some sort of professionalism. You have a website, you have a domain, you have an email address that matches your domain. So you're showing a sense of professionalism. So having something up there, you can get a web page on WordPress or Wix or Strikingly or whatever that can look professional, have some text in there that looks somewhat professional. But the spending a lot of money on a website, the critical thing for me has been blogging. And I've been blogging for basically 9 years now. And what I've been writing about is things that I care about: background investigations, criminal record checks, how to be a PI, how I started my business. I've written 200 blogs. I've written for Pursuit magazine. I've written for a bunch of other publications as well. So as far as my professional, how my professionalism and how my sort of name has gotten out there and my networking, the blog and my website has been probably the most critical thing that I have done in my business. I haven't spent a lot of money on it, but I think I've spent a total of $1,000 or $1,500. I think the first one was like $500 and the second one might've been $750. But regardless, it's the content that I put on there that has made it absolutely critical. So blogging and writing about stuff and people finding me through Google search engine. I get something like 40 or 50,000 people a month on my website. And it's generated me quite a bit of business. And Hal and I were talking before this. I've kept track of these things since the beginning, and we talked at the beginning about having a network and referrals and personal references that are absolutely the most critical thing to having a successful business. The blogging and internet and professional, the things that I've done on social media and those kind of things have brought in about 20% of my revenue over the past 9 years or so. So it's a pretty significant chunk. There's no doubt that my personal references and all those things have certainly play a bigger part in the revenue that I've been able to generate. But my website has been absolutely critical to other parts of my life as well.
Yeah. So I will say this, as far as websites go, yes, you absolutely need to have a website. And if you go to diligentiagroup.com, the URL at the top is diligentia.group.com. If you go to findinvestigations.com, it's a strikingly web page, but I went to the pro plan, so the URL is findinvestigations.com. Have it be professional, have it look good. I'm going to go ahead and share Brian's website here with the group. This is Diligentia Group's website, and this is a blog post that Brian put up, 17 lessons I learned from 15 years as a private investigator. The key here is Brian shares a lot of information about what it is he does and about how he goes about his work. I think that's one of the things that I'd like to talk about next. I will say this: we're at the halfway mark. This is PI Education's monthly webinar for August 2018. I'm Hal Humphreys, your host. I'm joined by Brian Willingham. We're talking today about the business of investigations. So there is this thing that happens in the PI world where people think, I'm a private investigator, I'm top secret, I don't share anything with anybody. That's just, I think, bad business. The more people you help, the better off you do. The more stuff you share, the more stuff you get. I believe that in my heart. There's an old Zig Ziglar quote where he says, you can have anything in the world you want if you help enough other people get what they want. And I think that's absolutely true. Brian does his blogging on his website. PI Education and Pursuit magazine, which is owned by the same company that owns PI Education, is where I provide the blog stuff. But we have a notion that sharing information freely and openly and helping other people be better at the business is key to our success. And I'm convinced that it is. And Brian's actually got numbers. It's not just anecdotal.
Yeah, listen. And again, something that I'm stressing from what we talked about at the beginning. This works for Hal and I. There are a number of investigators who carry on this, secretive, I have access to things that nobody else has access to. I can't tell you how I found out about stuff. I'd have to kill you kind of stuff. Here's what I would say to that. And listen, I have total respect for however anybody wants to do their business. What I would say is you will attract the kind of people that you are marketing to. So I put myself out there as somebody who's open, who likes to share, who's trying to be helpful. So if somebody calls me and says, hey, I've got this I need a forensic accounting thing that you need to dig through all these financial records and, find the missing, transfer or something like that. And I'm not that guy. And I think a lot of people would try to be that guy, but I'm not that guy. I'm going to be the guy that's going to say, hey, I'm going to go and refer this out to somebody else. And I'm going to be as helpful as I possibly can to them. And these are the kind of people that I tend to attract. I tend to attract people who are more like-minded like me. If you want the secret spy, if you're going to put on that persona of the secret spy, undercover kind of thing, those are the kind of crazy people you're going to attract. And there are millions of crazy people out there that are willing to talk to you and hire you and all that stuff. And that's totally fine. That's not necessarily who I want to work with. And the benefit of putting yourself out there like this is people know who you are. So they see me and they might think, this guy's an idiot. He has no idea what he's doing. He's sharing all his secrets, blah, 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 blah. Those people aren't going to call me, and that's totally fine. I don't need them to call me because they're probably not going to be a good fit for me. So the more that the things that you do to put yourself out there, those are the kind of people that you're going to attract. And I don't know if you've had the same experience, Hal.
I still have tinfoil hat people call me on a fairly regular basis. It happens. I had an ethical question with an attorney a couple of days ago. I basically said, look, I've got a call from this lady. She's, I've tried to dissuade her. I've tried to tell her to, at the end of the day, I still don't know what I'm going to do with that job. I don't, I focus on criminal defense work. That is my specialty. That's what I try to do. I still get calls from people wanting other things done. And, you ask yourself, what is it that I do? If you're having a slow month and somebody with a tinfoil hat calls you and wants you to do something, if it's ethical and legal and reasonable, and you have the time to do it, absolutely take that work. But I think you're right, Brian. What you put out there to the world is kind of what you attract, and that's just kind of the way it is. I would like to move on at this point and talk about some let's first talk about, I know that you just recently hired your first investigator on staff. I recently did the same. I'm having some struggles with figuring out exactly how to delegate and how to do this thing. So speaking now to the folks in the crowd that are running kind of a one-man shop or thinking about hiring someone to help out, Brian, what has your experience been with, how to let go of some of that control?
Yeah, listen, it's hard. And, we've talked offline about this before, but, I think here are the couple things. One is when I first started out, I did everything. I would talk to every single person that would make an inquiry on my website. I'd do my accounting. I'd answer the phones. I'd send every email. I'd draft every marketing material. As time goes on, you can start delegating some of that stuff out. And while I just hired my first investigator, I've been working with other investigators for years. I subcontract work out to 3 or 4 other investigators on a very regular basis. And it helps to supplement to take up my time. I can bill them out at a rate. I can make some money off of them, and it frees me up to do certain things. I can now pay somebody to answer my phone. So I think as you grow and as time persists, you have to figure out the things that are sucking up your time and that are costing you business or work or whatever that is. And whatever you're good at too. And I think that's one of the things that I would certainly stress. I love accounting. I can sit in my QuickBooks all day. If I wasn't doing this, I'd probably be an accountant. Other people out there might not be good at the business side of things. So, those are the kind of things that I would start trying to figure out what you can outsource when you don't have time to do anything else. I put in a lot of hours. I work probably way more than I should admit. And, you know, I think there comes a time when there's just no more hours left in the day to do it. And those are the times where you have to start figuring out what you should be delegating and how you should be delegating. So the reason why I had an investigator is multiple fold, but I've been using other investigators, and I knew that I had enough work to keep him relatively busy. The investigator I hired, who also his name is Brian, he's very green, and you know, it was very challenging at the beginning. I think there's a nice blog post about him if you're interested in reading that, but it was very challenging at the beginning, figuring out the work that I could give him, what I could trust him to do, and you know, sort of easy things that were sort of take things off of my plate. And as time goes on, you develop a rapport. You know what he's good at. You know what is easily, you know, that I can delegate. So I think, to answer your question in a very long way, I think once you get to that point of you've got more than you have, you know, more stuff than you have hours in the day, that's when you got to start figuring out what are those things that I can start sort of delegating out, and finding those things that are sort of quick and easy at the beginning and obviously become more challenging over time. But I challenge Brian every day to kind of get out of his comfort zone, talking to potential clients, writing, you know, reports and emails, and we talk about this stuff quite often. So
one of the things I find is, you know, and again, there, as Brian said, there are only so many hours in the day, only so many things you can do as a sole practitioner. I answer my own phones. I don't have a large client base. But if you have a decent sized client base, when you go to the doctor's office, does the doctor answer the phone when you call to make an appointment? Does the doctor greet you when you walk into the front door of his office? Does he do the initial intake business with you? No, all that stuff is done by someone else. We're professionals. We should behave like professionals. It can save a lot of time. Brian has gotten to a spot where he's got an answering service and they deal with his calls. The amount of time I spend on the phone is becoming problematic, and I'm considering doing a very similar thing because it takes so much of my time away. If you've read Tim Ferriss's The 4-Hour Work Week, there's some really good tips and tricks in there for things you can do to kind of outsource. But just kind of look at the things you do and what brings in income, what makes you money, what doesn't, what's costing you time and money. And also give some thought to what you enjoy doing. Brian likes the accounting stuff. I absolutely hate the accounting stuff. I have a mind for it. I don't mind doing it. It's just not fun for me. So I part that out to someone else. But yeah, delegating and doing those things is definitely helpful for an investigator, especially if you run in your own shop. We got a question from the crowd. What traits do you look for in an employee, Brian?
Wow, we had a good discussion about this last week. What traits do I look for in an employee? Listen, I think when I was looking to hire somebody, I was looking to hire somebody who was green, who really wasn't in this business. So I was looking for somebody who didn't necessarily have those skills of what would be classic investigative skills, or even a history of investigative skills. You know, I think dedication and persistence are two of the skills that I would, you know, look to most, more so than any other skills. We had this Hal and I were both on a show last week or a couple weeks ago, where we talked about this, but persistence, I think, is the word that kind of jumps out of my mind, because, you know, as much as everybody, you know, people watch too much TV, and obviously everybody thinks the answers are very quick and easy to find. And I don't want to get into political discussion, but the Mueller investigation that everybody talks about, why isn't this over? It should have been done a long time ago. Investigation is hard. and you've got to pour. You don't want to miss anything. You got to get through everything. And every time any investigation comes up, there's an investigation into the coach of Ohio State, and people are going crazy about how it's not done yet. These things are not easy. It's hard, and you have to be persistent. You have to go, you have to have that drive to kind of push your way through things. And that's absolutely critical.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, I mean, it all comes down to time and resources. How much time do you have, and how much money do you have to throw at the thing? That's what the bottom line is. But investigations done properly, whether we be doing criminal investigations for someone, a citizen accused of a horrible crime, and we're trying to do as much witness interviews as possible, that kind of thing, it just takes time and resources. Or whether we're doing due diligence research like Brian does, it comes down to time and resources. And for employees, what I'm looking for, and again, most of the work that I do is criminal defense investigations. What I'm looking for is, and I think Brian will follow along with this, is I'm looking for someone who's curious, someone who wants to know the answer to the next question, and someone who's comfortable talking to people. That is of utmost importance in the criminal defense world, is curiosity and the ability and willingness to go up and knock on a door of someone you've never met before and be able to talk your way into their life for a few minutes or a couple of hours and find out what they know about the thing. So what I'm looking for in an employee is a persistence. Yes, absolutely. That is key. And then curiosity and the ability to talk, communicate, and deal with people. We're down to about 15 minutes left to go on this webinar. So Brian, I'd like to do just a few minutes. We talked, we promised in the marketing material for this that we were going to share some tips and tricks. So one of the things that I do as a criminal defense investigator is I do a lot of interviews. Like that's the bulk of what I do, is tracking down witnesses and spending time talking to them. A lot of times I record those interviews with an audio recorder. Now, I have seen criminal defense investigators hand over reports of interviews where they just have like handwritten notes or just a half page of notes about the person said this, the person said this, they didn't know anything about this. That's okay if that's what you're tasked to do and that's what you're looking for. I find that recording the interviews allows me to show the attorney everything that was discussed. It protects me. The witness can't say I told them something I didn't tell them. It protects a witness. They can't say that, they told me something they didn't tell me, or they didn't say something that they did say. But one of the things that I use pretty much on a regular basis is a program called Rev, and I've got it up on the screen here right now, I believe. Rev is a transcription service, and it costs $1 per minute of audio that you have recorded, which sounds pretty expensive. But when you think about hiring a transcriptionist to do the work for you, $1 a minute is pretty cheap. It's not perfect, but it sure as heck works, and it gets the job done enough so that my attorneys can see exactly what I talked to the witness about, and kind of how the conversation went. It also allows the attorney to say to me, man, I wish you'd talked about X, Y, or Z, and I can go back and then cover those topics with them. So Rev, I have found to be a really useful tool. Brian, do you have any apps or web tricks that you like to use?
Yeah, I mean, from just a business side, I mean, I have engagement letters for every case that I ever worked out. We have like somewhere between 70 and 100 clients. And so we send out a bunch of engagement letters all the time. I handle mine all through Adobe, Adobe Acrobat, and then through their Adobe Sign. You can send engagement letters out, which can be digitally signed and then can be recorded and digitally recorded. It's very important to me. Having an engagement letter, I've had very few issues over my career with collecting or people arguing about things, but I know that it's important, and if it ever does become an issue, it's going to wind up saving my ass. So that's one that I use. Todoist is a program that I use quite frequently too. I'm going to try to share my screen as well. Hopefully I'm not going to give out my I don't want to share that, Hal. So Todoist is a program that I use frequently. And what I use this for is it's basically a to-do structure. I can set up tasks for myself to do, casework that I'm working on, anything. It could be casework. It could be blogs. It could be marketing materials. It could be reaching out to people and those kind of things. The other thing I use frequently is LastPass. So Hal, obviously interviews are a massive thing for him. Doing interviews is something that he does on a daily basis. My bailiwick is online investigations. I have access to hundreds of databases, including Netflix and DoorDash. So I think there's something like 700 or 800 usernames and passwords in here that are saved in LastPass. And what this does is it generates a extremely secure password that for each of the databases. It saves them in a format that you can scroll around the web, and it'll save all these different passwords for you. So you're not using the same ABC 123 password for everything. So those are the couple that I use. I also use Harvest. Harvest is a time tracking tool, which I find to be the easiest time tracking tool out there, and invoicing software. It's absolutely phenomenal. I've recommended it to a bunch of people, and everybody has said the same thing. You can track your time on your phone, manage expenses, and bill your clients that way. So those are the couple that I use that are that I use on a regular basis. Hal, I think you use Harvest too, don't you?
I do, and I find Harvest to be it is the best tool that I use on a regular basis. And I'll just go ahead and see if we can get that up on the screen here for the folks that are watching. So Harvest is an application that you can download an app for your phone. It works on iPhone and Android, obviously, but you can go in and select new entry. You can see if I can do this, if it shows up on the screen. Yeah, you can select a client, you can select a project, and you can just kind of keep track of your time in a very simple fashion. I really enjoy Harvest for its ease of use, number one. But the other thing is, at the end of the day, when I'm ready to develop an invoice, I just go into Harvest and say, invoice this client for unbilled hours for this period of time, and it builds an invoice, and it separates it out by project and by time, and you can get as detailed as you want to, or it's not as detailed as you want to. So Harvest is a fantastic tool to use. Another thing that I have found the past couple of years is crazy helpful, and Brian, I don't know if you've deal with this or not, but let's do this. Share Evernote. I'm
a big Evernote fan.
Okay, so I use Evernote on a daily basis now because in the question we just got from the crowd was comment on case management software. Evernote can work as a case management software. If you're doing research the way Brian does for kind of online research, you can use Evernote to clip a web page or a website, or the whole site or a page or whatever. For the work that I do, all of the attorneys and staff involved in a criminal defense case will have access to the Evernote file and all of the notebooks that deal with that one case, and we can share the players list, the timeline, all of that information in Evernote, and update it in real time. And again, there's an app for the phone, so if I'm out doing interviews, I can use the Evernote checklist to say, I've got this guy to talk to, I've got this guy to talk to, I didn't talk to this girl, I'd stop by her house this time, and just kind of detail what I've done. And everybody has access to it, and everybody on the team has access to it and can be up to date on what's being done. So those are just a few of the tools that we use in ways that we try to use technology to stay a little bit ahead of the game and gain some efficiency.
And one of the other things that I've see, I'm the total opposite of Hal. I do mostly phone interviews. I'm working on a big multi-jurisdictional litigation matter where I'm doing interviews over the phone. So I don't record most of my calls. But anyway, needless to say, I'm mostly taking notes. I scan all my notes. So a scanner has probably been one of the most, I've tried to be as paperless as possible. I think that's, in this day and age, having everything sort of, saved, and so you can address it, access it at some point later on. I save it into Evernote in many cases. So I think that's one of the things that I would strongly suggest as well.
Yep. So Brian, we're getting down here to the last few minutes. I think we've covered most of the topics we had initially set out to cover. We got a question from the crowd about, would love to hear your marketing successes, failures, to Facebook or not Facebook, to tweet or not to tweet. What are the most worthy and effective advertising techniques for you?
Okay. That's one thing I think we were going to bring up before. I think for social media, I think is absolutely critical. I think social media for me, along with blogging, have probably been the two most important things as far as me generating sort of a name for myself. I've generated quite a following of people from my blog, from things that I post on Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter. And to me, it's more of a professionalism. You are putting yourself out there as somebody who's a thought leader, who's somebody who that people can trust. And to me, I think it's critical not only to be on there, but to participate as well. So to me, I think it's a very important part of your business. And listen, I'm of an age. I'm in my early 40s. I'm of an age of when I am about to do business with somebody or I'm working with somebody, one of the first things I do is I Google their name and to see if they have a social media profile. It validates them. If they don't have, if they are an accountant down the road or some guy that I'm about to do business with and he doesn't have a Facebook page, it makes me think, was this guy stuck in the dark ages, or is he real, or does he exist, or whatever the case may be. So it validates you as a business, and I think it's absolutely critical. What was the other question they had? Website, advertising,
Twitter.
I kind of throw social media all in the same boat. Listen, I think it's very dependent on you as well. If that's not your bag, I don't blame you if you don't actively participate in it. I get a kick out of it. I enjoy it. I enjoy talking to people. I've become friendly with people over social media and met them in person. It's part of a networking thing. It's part of it's part of a lot of that kind of stuff. So I think to me it's very important to be part of that.
Yeah, and I agree. I think, again, going back to kind of the standard PI model, I know there are several private investigators out there that just eschew any form of social media and say, I would never do that because I'm a private investigator and be totally, stealth about everything I do. Look, guys, it's 2018. It's out there. I play on Facebook a little bit. It annoys me, so I don't play on it as much as I should. I engage on Twitter. I personally enjoy Instagram because it seems to be the least mean version of social media. But yeah, I mean, having that profile, having that footprint is not necessarily a bad thing if you're a private investigator.
And one quick story, and the person that I was speaking to might even be on this, but anyway, the gentleman had called me the other day, kind of, trying to give me his name and give me his resume and say, hey, if you ever have any extra work, he's out Midwest or somewhere. And I'm like, why don't you send me, your LinkedIn profile or, some social media, just so I have you and we can connect. And, if anything ever comes up that we can, and he was very coy about it. He's like, I'm dark, I don't belong to all that. So it makes me, there's a couple things. One is, I don't know how he's going to get any business if he's not out there. If you're, it's very difficult to sort of, promote yourself if you're not going to be out there. But also, from my investigative point of view, if you are somebody who doesn't participate in social media and you are doing online investigations like I do, it's very difficult to be aware and to be an expert at what these things do if you don't participate at all. So to me, it was an immediate sort of red flag of like, I don't know if I'm going to be doing work with this guy because of that. Listen, things may work out. He may have an expertise that I need or whatever the case may be. But it's certainly something to think about.
Yeah. The last question from the crowd before we go, we've got Diligent Investigator asks, Before it slips in my mind, do you all know of any association memberships that provide particularly useful for that have proved particularly useful for gaining new clients? I'm going to say, from my personal experience, not so much.
I would say the exact same thing.
Brian,
I've been part of local community groups. I've been part of bigger community groups. We've been both part of the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, which there are not a lot of investigators that work with a lot of big corporations. That's generated me almost nothing. So I think relationships, I think anything that you will come out of this is relationships are key. Very, very strong, good, really good relationships. It doesn't matter where they're from. It's having those relationships and then extending out, branching outwards from there.
And to that end, I will say, my off the cuff quip about not so much. I mean, being a member of the Certified Fraud Examiners Group, the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, has increased my network of people that I really enjoy spending time with who do investigative work around the country. It has been beneficial that way. Has it got me specific work? Yeah, a couple times it has, but by and large, it's a way to grow the list of people that I know around the country that I can reach out to if I have a question or if I need some help in a different area. So the ACFE is a good one. Look into your local groups and see if there's someone there. It never hurts to meet people and build those relationships. Brian, we're out of time. It is 2:00 my time, 3:00 your time. One last time, folks, you've been listening to the 2018 August version of the PI Education webinar. We appreciate you being here. We're thrilled, Brian, to have you here today, and thanks so much for sharing your thoughts and your wisdom.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to the next one.
All right, y'all have a good weekend.